In 1932, in Macon County, Alabama, the Great Depression had already hollowed out the countryside. Cotton fields lay quiet beneath a tired sun. Money was scarce. Doctors were distant. Trust, when offered, felt like mercy. So when representatives of the United States Public Health Service arrived, promising free medical care, transportation, and hot meals, hundreds of black men stepped forward. They were told they were being treated for bad blood. It was a local phrase, broad and imprecise. Fatigue, anemia, something wrong beneath the surface. It did not mean syphilis. 400 of those men carried the disease. 200 more were enrolled as comparisons. None were told the full truth. None gave informed consent. The government did not come to cure them. It came to observe. For decades, physicians recorded symptoms as the illness advanced through stages medicine already understood. And when penicillin became the standard cure in 1947, the men in Macon County were not given it. This is not a story about ignorance. It is a story about choice. Macon County, Alabama, in the early 1930s, was poor even by Southern standards. Most families lived as tenant farmers, working land they did not own, bound to cycles of debt and failed harvests. Medical care was rare. Hospitals were distant. Many residents had never seen a trained physician. Syphilis was widespread across the rural South. Treatment in the early 20th century was inconsistent, painful, and often inaccessible. By 1932, the U.S. Public Health Service saw an opportunity. Officials partnered with the Tuskegee Institute, a respected black educational institution, to conduct what was described as a long-term study of untreated syphilis. The stated goal was to observe how the disease progressed in black men, a population many white physicians of the era wrongly believed experienced illness differently. 600 men were recruited. They were promised examinations, meals on clinic days, and burial insurance. In a county with few resources, those promises carried weight. The study was presented as care. It was, in truth, observation disguised as treatment. The study was structured with precision. Of the 600 men enrolled, 399 had syphilis. The remaining 201 did not. They served as a control group. Blood tests were taken. Spinal taps were performed. Records were carefully kept. The men were never told they had syphilis. Instead, they were told they were being treated for bad blood. Letters described the procedures as special treatment. Painful spinal taps were framed as therapeutic care. In reality, treatment was never the objective. The Public Health Service intended to follow the men until death, documenting each stage of the disease. Researchers wanted to observe what happened when syphilis was left entirely untreated. The progression was already known in broad medical terms. What they sought were long-term, detailed confirmations. The design required one condition above all others. The men could not receive proper therapy. As years passed, doctors monitored symptoms, autopsies were requested, and reports were filed. The study was not hidden in secrecy. It was conducted in plain administrative routine. Deception was not an accident. It was protocol. By the early 1940s, medical understanding of syphilis had advanced. Then, in 1947, penicillin became the standard treatment. It was safe, widely available, and remarkably effective. Across the country, patients were cured. In Macon County, the study continued. The men were not informed that a cure existed. Local physicians were discouraged from treating them. When some participants were drafted during World War II and diagnosed by military doctors, study officials intervened to ensure they did not receive penicillin. Lists were shared with draft boards to keep the experiment intact. The objective had not changed. Researchers still intended to document the full, natural progression of untreated disease. Years passed. Symptoms worsened. Some men developed neurological complications. Others lost their sight. Many died from causes directly linked to syphilis. Wives were infected. Children were born with congenital illness. The presence of a cure did not end the study. It forced a decision, and the decision was to continue. By the late 1960s, the study had been running for nearly 4 decades. Generations had grown older under its quiet watch. Within the public health service, some began to question whether it should continue. Internal concerns were raised. They were dismissed. In 1972, a young epidemiologist named Peter Buxton brought the story to the press after repeated objections inside the agency were ignored. The Associated Press picked it up. The headline traveled quickly. The reaction was immediate. Public outrage spread across the country. Lawmakers demanded answers. Medical ethics, once discussed in academic rooms, entered living rooms and front pages. Within months, the study was formally terminated, 40 years after it began. Investigations followed. Congressional hearings examined how such a project could have continued through changing administrations, evolving medical standards, and the discovery of a cure. The study had survived war, scientific advancement, and internal doubt. It did not end because it quietly concluded. It ended because it was exposed. When the study ended in 1972, the damage was already measured in lives. At least 128 men had died directly from syphilis or its complications. Dozens of wives had been infected. Children were born with congenital disease that might never have existed. In 1973, a class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of the survivors and their families. The case resulted in a financial settlement and a promise of lifetime medical benefits for participants and certain relatives. Money, however, could not return health, nor restore years taken under false assurances. More lasting was the fracture of trust. The revelation deepened long-standing skepticism toward medical institutions within Black communities. Participation in public health programs declined. Vaccination rates fell in some regions. The shadow extended far beyond Macon County. In 1997, President Bill Clinton formally apologized on behalf of the United States government, acknowledging the injustice and the betrayal of trust. The apology was historic, but trust, once broken over 40 years, does not mend quickly. The Tuskegee study did not begin in secrecy. It began in paperwork, in signatures, in routine correspondence between officials who believed they were serving science. That may be the most unsettling part. It was not driven by chaos, but by administration. Not by a single rogue actor, but by a system that convinced itself the end justified the means. Decade after decade, the study continued because stopping it would have required someone to admit it was wrong. History often tempts us to believe that injustice collapses when knowledge advances, that progress corrects cruelty on its own. Tuskegee challenges that comfort. A cure existed, standards evolved, yet the study endured until exposure forced its end. The lesson is not only about racism in medicine, though that truth is undeniable. It is also about accountability, about what happens when authority is left unchecked. Trust in medicine depends on transparency, consent, and dignity. When those foundations crack, the damage echoes beyond a single generation. The ledger does not close easily. Some entries remain, not as numbers, but as warnings.